Hello everyone, Shirley here, and welcome to my 10.2 Arms Warrior Guide. We're going to go over everything today from PvE, rating, Mythic Plus, just AoE, stuff like that, as well as a little bit of PvP at the end, gear, enchants, talents, all that jazz. So strap right in, this is going to be a long one. I'm going to go ahead and apologize right away if my voice gets a little rough by the end of this. This is actually the second time I recorded this today. I recorded the voiceover earlier and then realized I didn't record the video, so take two, I guess. Anyway, jumping right in here to our gear and stat priorities today. It's going to be haste, crit is our two main secondary stats. Generally a little bit more haste. You can see my stat lines right now. Quite a bit more haste, actually. However, this is going to be slightly skewed because of a little bit of talent points that we have. But haste, crit, and then mastery into versatility. Versatility, as the season goes on and you get more gear, is going to see a little bit more value because of some of the best trinkets we have, being like Razan's and the Cataclysmic Signet brand, as well as if you're lucky enough to get fyr'alath, the legendary axe, it's going to scale with verse. It's not huge, but it is going to see a little bit more value. As well as our tier set, it's going to be buffing Rend by a little bit, as well as proccing Sudden Death and making it cast a free Thunderclap that does 100% increased damage, and giving us a little bit of execute bonus damage as well. Surprisingly good in AoE because of the free Thunderclap cast. As far as embellishments that I'm running right now, I'm using the Shadow Flame enchant once again on the shawl, or the cloak in this case, because it's a little bit lower item level than top-end Mythic stuff, so it's not going to scale quite so good as, you know, if you were to get something in 489, for example. But that's the one I'm using on that. And then the second one is the Allied Wrist Guard of Companionship. We had this back in Season 1. This is a great stat stick piece. It's just going to give you a flat amount of versatility practically all the time, especially in rating. So can't really go wrong with those two. As far as consumables, our enchants and stuff, waking stats, you know, the big two off your pants as well. Can't remember what that one's called off the top of my head. And wafting devotion is generally what I'm going to be using. I think Sophic is the other one that procs main stat. You could go with that. Just depends on what your character needs at the time. Sim it yourself if you need to. And then as far as other consumables, I'm going to be using the Iced Phial of Corrupting Rage for the most part in raids. Occasionally the Tepid Versatility one if you need that extra survivability, as well as in Mythic Plus I'm just going to be using the versatility ones. And then our runes between Buzzing and Howling if you need the crit or the haste, just depends on your gear at the particular time. The Potion of Ultimate Power is what I'm going to be using for on use. We got some fortune cookies here if you need a food buff if you don't have a feast. And then the Augment Rune, of course, if you get that from the new Reputation. So moving on to our talents. This is going to be our single target standard kind of talent build here. You could swap out a couple of things if you need Bounding Stride, for example, is one thing, or Wrecking Throw for certain bosses, like Tindril, for example. You might want Wrecking Throw, so you could drop Pain and Gain or a Point and Crushing Force for things like that if you need it. But generally, this is what you're going to run. And on this side of the tree, it's fairly similar to what we've ran in the past few seasons, except we're dropping Ignore Pain for Fueled by Violence, because Ignore Pain is no longer part of our rotation, which is a bit of a nerf, but it's still, you know, for the betterment of the spec. And once again, things are going to revolve around Test of Might and Anger Management. So we're going to be spending as much rage as we can as before. It's just our rotational priority is slightly different because we don't have Ignore Pain at our disposal, as well as our tier set giving us many more Sudden Death procs. So basically our single target rotation is going to be a priority system, being that among a few things. So we want to maintain our 2 bleeds on target, you know, at all times, being Rend and Deep Wounds off of, that's our mastery if you're new to Warrior. Deep Wounds off of Mortal Strike and Colossus Smash in this case, or Warbreaker if you're talented into it later for AoE. But the whole priority of things now is going to be casting Execute whenever we get a Sudden Death proc because of our tier set bonus. It's going to be the #1 priority outside of, you know, like on pull. But that's going to be #1 priority, followed by cooldowns, of course, being, you know, Avatar, Thunderous Roar, and Colossus Smash are our main 3 cooldowns. But otherwise, in a normal rotation, it's going to be Execute, followed by Mortal Strike, or I should specify Sudden Death procs, followed by Mortal Strike, and then Whirlwind to spend Rage, regardless of overpower charges, if you have the Rage bar for it. So if you know you're not going to have enough Rage, for example, to cast Mortal Strike the very next global if it's coming up, then you would say, you know, use an overpower charge before your Whirlwind, just so you can make sure that Mortal Strike is going to be cast on cooldown. It's your #1 priority. And then last but not least, we're going to be filling out our rotation with Slam anytime we have free globals and XX Rage to spend. No longer Thunderclap, because Deep Wound or Rend is going to be applied passively through Sudden Death procs a lot because of our tier set and these talent points that we have, being Blood and Thunder here. So the way that's going to work on a pull here is, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Our opener is a little bit priority contentious at the moment. Like I said, we want to get Rend up ideally on the target as fast as possible. However, on a pull, you know, with cooldowns and everything, I'm going to recommend you do it slightly differently, and that's for a few reasons, but mostly because we're starved for globals. We have too many things we want to press immediately. It's just a triage system of which one do you press first, you know, for the perfect opener, quote-unquote. The way I'm going to recommend it is that I want to get 2 Whirlwinds into my Colossus Smash window, so it's a 13-second window. Whirlwind's got a 10-second CD for me anyway, affected by haste, so this might slightly change depending on your gear. But I want that to give us a big Test of Might buff off the rip. Later on in the rotation, as you're just attacking things normally without cooldowns, these 2 are going to fall out of sync, so you won't always be able to fit 2 Whirlwinds in that window. Don't worry about it, that's normal. It's just on pull, this is what I'm going to recommend. Being that I'm going to be charging and send my avatar with my Thunderous Roar, actually, just immediately, into our Colossus Smash to get our big burst window rolling, and then it's Mortal Strike immediately after that, because it's on priority, and then I'm going to cast Whirlwind right after the Mortal Strike, and keep in mind, Ren's not actually on the target at this point, so after this Whirlwind, then I'm going to use Thunderclap, and that's to spend as much Rage as I can in this window, and apply Rend at the very end of that, and then it's back to our standard priority of weaving in overpowers and using Mortal Strike on cooldown, and any sudden death procs that pop up we consume instantly, ideally anyway. And just to get in those 2 Whirlwinds in this window here. So I'm going to show that off real quick here. We're going to charge in, use our Avatar, Thunderous Roar into CS, into MS, into Whirlwind, and we Thunderclap, and then fit in an overpower into our standard single target rotation here. Using a Slam here, and then we could fit in that Whirlwind right at the tail end of our Colossus Smash buff, and that's what our opener is going to look like. We got a 31% strength bonus. This is going to vary depending on procs and how many slams you have to fit in, but that's the idea behind it, is to get in as much Rage in that first window as possible. Like I said, it's gonna fall out of sync later, as well as be a lot different if you get Sudden Death procs, because Sudden Death is going to take priority over that. So yeah, that's our opener with cooldowns. I'm just going to show like a general rotation real quick. We're going to, with just CS up, we got a Sudden Death proc, we're going to use that, get up Rend, of course, and then it's Mortal Striking on cooldown. If we get a proc off Overpower, we're going to immediately go back into MS again, Slam to fill out that last global there, and then Whirlwind as soon as it comes up, using Overpowers. You can watch down on the left here my rotation. Generally, it's accurate. Outside of Execute, it doubles up on that a lot of times, but that's not actually at casting twice, and that Thunderclap's the auto one from the tier set. So that's the single target rotation. I almost forgot Execute phase. How could I forget that? So for single target here at the end of a fight during Execute phase, the way it's going to look is we're going to be eliminating Whirlwind and Slam from our rotation in favor of spending Rage just through Execute in this case. You want to maintain your dots, of course, but the way it's going to look is you're going to cast 2 Executes, generally, for Executioner's Precision into a Mortal Strike, rinse repeating that rotation, and then weaving in Overpowers anytime you're below 40 Rage, just to help smooth out the rotation as well as generate Rage through the Strength of Arms talent here. So, in practicality, it's going to look like 2 executes, overpower, mortal strike, 2 executes, overpower, mortal strike, etc. That swaps out a little bit when you have Colossus Smash up, or if you're getting flooded with Rage. So anytime you have the CS window up, you're going to want to spend as much Rage as possible, so it might go 3 executes into a mortal strike, 3 executes into a mortal strike. Just depends on your Rage economy at the time, as well as if you're getting sudden death procs, because it's going to make your executes free, so you're going to want to cast this more and force overpower out of the execute rotation to get that big test of might buff during the CS window. And last but not least, one thing you can kind of maximize, depending on the boss fight, if you know it's going to live a little bit longer and things are going to line up, is when you get your Avatar and Thunderous Roar back up during execute phase, you can delay Thunderous Roar still until the Test of Might window. So if you're sending Avatar with Colossus Smash and just spamming executes and spending as much Rage as possible during that window, then once CS falls off, then you can send your Thunderous Roar during that Test of Might window. It's just a little bit, you know, more manageable with your Rage economy in the execute phase, especially if you're like bloodlusting at the tail end of a fight. I'd highly recommend you do that, or if it can hit multiple targets. But anyway, that's the one thing I think I was forgetting. If you have any questions about that, leave them down below. I'll gladly answer. We're going to move on to some of our AoE builds, being we've got 2 that we can use, generally speaking, for Mythic Plus right now, being a Bladestorm build and a Cleave build. This is the Bladestorm build that we're going to go over first today. Generally, you can obviously swap out things like Uproar if you need to get down into Shockwave, depending on your team comp. But otherwise, this is going to be like a general burst AoE DPS build. We still have Stormbolt to help with things where we can. You could pick up Intimidating Shout as well if your group needs it. Just depends on your comp at the time. But anyway, on this side of the tree, we're picking up Bladestorm and Hurricane, as well as improved Sweeping Strikes to help pad out just our general AoE damage throughout a dungeon. We have Warbreaker and In for the Kill, just to give us that haste bonus to get, you know, as much burst within the Warbreaker window as possible. And the way this is going to look on these 4 AoE targets, the priority of damage is pretty much the same as it is in single target. We want to maintain Rend on as many targets as possible, so Thunderclap's going to do that job in AoE. You're going to go in, put up Rend on everything, and then you can apply Deep Wounds for everything with Warbreaker and pad that way. So our burst window, basically, with Bladestorm, you can do it 2 ways, and this depends on your key level as well as how long things are going to live, you know, what the week is. Without getting too bogged down, if things are going to die quickly, I would recommend you do it this first way that I'm going to show. If you're doing like a high key, like a 24 or something, and you know that a big group of mobs is going to live for a really long time, you can do it a slightly different way. So, and that's just for a little bit better DPS over a longer period. But this first one's more for like quick, bursty, you know, packs and stuff like a 20 if you're just getting your vault filled out. So we're going to charge in Thunderclap to apply Rend everything, and then I'm going to Warbreaker into Thunderous Roar, and then immediately Avatar at the same time as that Thunderous Roar, and that's to not only, you know, use Avatar, but it's to proc our Blademaster's Torment talent, give us that free Bladestorm cast, which is going to automatically ramp up our Hurricane window during that Warbreaker with Thunderous Roar already rolling. This is just to do as much damage in that first Warbreaker as possible. As soon as the Bladestorm finishes casting, we're going to have 6 seconds from Hurricane to do, you know, more burst. So immediately following that, I'm going to use a big Whirlwind from our Storm of Swords talent. And then you can follow up with the Sweeping Strikes and go into Overpower, Mortal Strike, etc., depending on how many targets there are. So if it's like 4 targets like this, you could throw in a few more Overpowers just to get those Dreadline, you know, value out of it. And then at the very tail end of our Hurricane buff window, if everything is still alive and it's, you know, not going to die in the next 2 seconds, then you could use your normal Bladestorm cast itself to maintain the Hurricane buff. It won't fall off, so you can extend the 6 seconds into 12 seconds, or a little bit longer actually with the channel time of Bladestorm, and give you this 30% buff. And then after that, you know, you do the same thing. You throw in a big Whirlwind and continue to pad out your AoE. However, in most dungeon groups, I would recommend you save that actual Bladestorm cast for like the next group of things that you can line up again with Warbreaker and just that Bladestorm to, you know, alternate your damage in your group a little bit better as you go out. However, in a high key, if you know things are on like fortified, things are going to live for a really long time. You can mix it up slightly on your cooldown priority. You obviously want to put Rend up on everything immediately with Thunderclap. And then you could go into Avatar immediately, and that's to trigger the free Bladestorm, as well as immediately starting to ramp this Hurricane buff. And then as soon as that Bladestorm drops, then I'm going to Warbreaker into a Thunderous Roar, into a big Whirlwind in that Hurricane window. And then at the tail end of it, I'm going to, you know, always use the actual Bladestorm to maintain that Hurricane buff throughout the entire duration at max stacks, ideally, of Thunderous Roar. And that's just going to be a little bit better prolonged DPS, but a lot of groups things aren't going to live that long, so it just depends on what you're playing with. So anyway, demonstrating that here real quick. I'm going to do it the first way for most groups that you're probably going to encounter if you're watching this. So we're going to charge in, put up our Rends into a Warbreaker, into a Thunderous Roar, and then proc our Avatar Bladestorm, and then we're going to use a big Whirlwind out of that, pop Sweeping Strikes, still using any sudden death procs as they come up, and our Hurricane buff's about to fall off, so I'm going to use our actual cast of Bladestorm, and then we're going to hit another big Whirlwind out of that, using our Overpowers to get those Dreadnought lines out, and continuing to do damage that way. And this build is going to be using, you know, you want to maintain Rend on as many targets as possible, cycling your Warbreaker around to keep deep wounds up, and then it's alternating between lots of Overpowers and Mortal Strikes to help cleave everything down, and that's your passive AoE, using sudden death procs whenever they come up, ideally with Sweeping Strikes up. And yeah, that's pretty much the burst rotation for the Bladestorm build. Any questions about that, ask below. And our second build today we're going to look at is going to focus on the Fervor of Battle Talents. It's going to forego our burst windows from Bladestorm, but give us better consistent damage, generally speaking. Kind of depends on the dungeon. But this build... Oh, excuse me there. This build I would probably recommend to most groups and most people. The Bladestorm build might be a little bit more fun, but it requires a little bit more setup and coordination to get more value out of it. This one's going to be consistent all the time. The only downside is its single target's not great, but Arms' single target without, you know, the raid build isn't great anyway. This one's just going to lack the big burst setup of Bladestorm. But the way this is going to play out, we've dropped a few talents to pick up Improved Slam, as well as Blood Surge, and we're actually using Test of Might in this build, instead of In for the Kill for more consistent damage, as well as we still have Improved Sweeping Strikes, but we're taking collateral damage now instead of Storm of Swords. And the idea being that we're going to want to spend as many globals as possible in this Sweeping Strikes window to give us that great big Whirlwind at the very end. And Fervor of Battle is going to help facilitate that, as well as giving us a big Test of Might buff during our Warbreaker windows. And Blood Surge is going to help feed the rage necessary to do that. We're taking all the talents that buff Slam and Whirlwind on both sides of the tree here, just for that consistent pad damage. And the way this one's going to play is you want to keep up Rend and Deep Wounds as much as possible, of course. We're going to be consuming Sudden Death procs, you know, as they come up. But on 3+ targets, 4 here in this case, our Whirlwind is going to take priority over Overpower and Mortal Strike for the most part. We want to maintain Deep Wounds as much as possible, of course. And then you're going to use Overpower to fill in globals if you ever can't cast Whirlwind. Ideally, during your Warbreaker window, you're going to be spending Rage for the Test of Might buff, but it's inevitable that, you know, sometimes you won't get enough Rage for it. So, on the pull here, or just generally, I'm going to go in, put up Rend on everything, use cooldowns with Avatar and Warbreaker into a Thunderous Roar to get that rolling on everything, and then I'm going to Sweeping Strikes and spam Whirlwind on 4+ targets like this, and that's pretty much it. We want to spend as many globals as possible for our big collateral damage buff here. And then at the very end of our Sweeping Strikes window, if we've spent enough Rage, Warbreaker should be coming back around, you know, within 5 seconds-ish. And we're actually using the Warlord's Torment talent on this side of the tree again instead of the Bladestorm proc. So we're getting that Recklessness for free on our Warbreaker casts. So you can line this up, or what generally happens is it lines up nicely in dungeons, that you'll have this great big collateral damage whirlwind right about the time that Warbreaker's coming back up again. So you can throw that Warbreaker on the next set of things, or immediately as it comes up, and get that big whirlwind in that Warbreaker window. And the Recklessness proc from this talent is going to give it a 20% increased crit chance. So this whirlwind at the end can hit really hard. It can do more damage than Bladestorm in its one cast. So yeah, that's kind of the flow of it. So demonstrating this here real quick. I'm going to go in, put up our rend on everything, use our cooldown window, throwing Thunderous Roar, Sweeping Strike, so I got a sudden death. I'm going to spend that immediately here. And then it's spamming as many whirlwinds as we can within this Warbreaker window. If you drop enough rage, you can throw in an overpower there. And I'm going to throw in a Mortal Strike just to maintain deep wounds on these two targets that I'm hitting at the moment, using our sudden death procs, weaving in those overpowers. And now that Sweeping Strikes is down, I got 19 stacks, and Warbreaker just came back up again. So I can throw that Warbreaker into a great big nasty whirlwind at the end of that. And it's a rinse repeat, because Sweeping Strikes has such little downtime. In a dungeon, you're just going to be throwing that on cooldown, basically, and continuing to AoE with Whirlwind. And Thunderclap, ideally from your sudden death procs to maintain rend on as many targets as possible. And that's pretty much it. As far as like single target priority, I guess I didn't mention with the Bladestorm build, it's going to be the same as our single target priority beforehand. You're just going to be cutting out Whirlwind because Fervor Battle isn't doing anything in pure single target, so you're going to be using Slam instead on like a boss, for example. The execute phase is the same as it is in the other spec, though. So yeah, there's the Fervor of Battle build. I'll have all this stuff linked down below somewhere, so all these talent builds you can look at. And last but not least today, I'm going to take a quick peek at some PvP stuff. So this is going to be the PvP talent build. If you guys are interested, I realize not everybody's here for this, so if you're clicking off, thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. But otherwise, thanks for sticking around for the PvP stuff. This is the build I'm currently running, give or take a few things. It just kind of depends on what you're fighting, of course. But we got Shockwave, because it's buffed in PvP by a second. Stormbolt, of course. I am taking Thunderclap these days, and Blood and Thunder in PvP. I wasn't before, just because of the tier set. We're going to get value out of that all the time, which I am running 4 set and Arena. Occasionally, you'll swap things out for like Wrecking Throw if you need it, versus like a Rat Paladin, Warlock, that kind of thing. Don't generally take Bitter Immunity. It's just kind of a dead point right now. But yeah, we'll take Wrecking Throw occasionally with stuff like, where is it at? Demolition here, to pop shields. But on this side of the tree, the bleeds have been buffed so much in PvP over time that Spear's fallen out, so we're taking all the bleed talents. I am still speccing into Unhinged, even though it's nerfed in PvP. Hurricane's cut in half in PvP too, so it's not great. I like the burst of Unhinged still. I am running Executioner's Precision. You could swap this out for a few things if you like Exhilarating, for example. I don't generally run Skull Splitter, or never really. I don't like the spell, frankly. I am running both the defensive options up here, Ignore Pain. You could drop Fueled by Violence if you want to pick up something else in the tree, but I like having both of them for the survivability. And then on the PvP talent side of things, we got some new additions in 10.2. Being Battlefield Commander is the big one. You can't go wrong with this, frankly, if you're new to Arena. Take this all the time. It's gonna see use. The other one being Sharpened Blade, generally, you know, is going to be a safe bet. You could swap at it occasionally. And then Storm of Destruction, this third one I got here, this third slot, rather, is the one that's very flexible. We can swap this out all the time. It just depends on what you're doing. If you're playing a lot of solo queue RBGs, or solo shuffle arena, the redesigned version of Storm of Destruction here is really good, especially with an Unhinged. It's going to slow everything, reduce cooldown. It's pretty brain dead, but it works. Otherwise, if you're playing like rated 3v3 arena, the new iteration of Safeguard is incredibly good, giving you this 20% DR for your teammates on 2 charges. You can just cycle this with everybody else's defensive cooldowns. Really useful. Rebound sees the occasional use in like 2s and stuff, depending on what you're fighting. Warbringer I don't really use anymore, ever since it got nerfed, and it's just competing with too many other good talents now. Demolition I will spec into occasionally for Rat Paladins, Warlocks, Monks occasionally for, you know, breaking bubbles. Disarm, still a great talent. You're going to see a lot of use in Warrior, Rogue matchups occasionally, depending on what spec they're playing. Still pretty good. Death Sentence, don't really run anymore, just because of the talents it's competing with. Same thing with Duel. Duel could be good in very niche situations. War Banner is still pretty good versus things like RMP, high CC stuff. Kind of depends on what comp you're playing, though, is depending on how useful it's actually going to be. Storm, obviously. Shadow of the Colossus, never run it. It's just got way better options. And Master and Commander isn't bad, especially with the new Battlefield Commander talent. It's just, I can't run it as much as I would like to, because we have just better options a lot of times, but you might find a use for it occasionally, especially in the new Rated Battleground solo queue mode. I could see that being pretty useful with Battlefield Commander to give everybody that movement speed buff, if you're into that the BG scene anyway. But yeah, that's pretty much going to cover everything today. I knew I was forgetting something. Real quick here, I wanted to touch on the PvP side of things at the tail end here. Like a rotation thing. You don't really have a rotation in PvP. It's just a priority, of course. But other than maintaining rend and deep wounds on your targets, I just wanted to go over quickly like a setup for burst, you know, how to secure kills and everything like that. So obviously, you know, it's going to be set up with CC and everything, but like a burst window in PvP. Ideally, as an arms warrior, you're hitting 2 targets anytime you can because of sweeping strikes' value, as well as unhinged. So I'm going to put up rend on everything I can, and then I'm going to use my sweeping strikes into my burst window just to get as much value out of unhinged as possible. So what that's going to look like is I'm going to go in Thunderclap, Sweep, and then Warbreaker into Thunderous Roar and Avatar into my window. And then I'm going to use the Sudden Death proc out of that into a Mortal Strike, and then hardcast my normal Bladestorm just to get as many unhinged hits as possible out of that, using that window again into another Mortal Strike, and then it's back into normal rotation there. But weaving in those couple of Mortal Strikes on their cooldown during those 2 Bladestorm windows there, you know, is a lot of burst. We can get in 12 hits on 2 targets. Technically only casting it a couple of times, but Unhinged is doing its work there. Yeah, that's all I really wanted to go over real quick here, is just a quick little burst setup for PvP. If you guys have any questions, leave them down below. I'll do my best to answer where and when I can. Obviously, you're going to be wearing PvP gear for PvP stuff, stack and versatility and the like. But yeah, I think I've rambled on long enough. I'm sure I'm forgetting something, though. So I'll see you in the next one. Probably another Mythic raid video, if I had to guess. I will, yeah, I'm rambling. Thank you for watching. Peace.